Now to China, where delegates to the National People's Congress are trying to come up with solutions for the country's pressing economic and demographic challenges. The highly choreographed National People's Congress event has just kicked off in Beijing. Leaders have announced a target of 5% economic growth in 2024, far below the double-digit growth that was once powering the Chinese economy. They also plan to increase defense spending by 7.2%, the same rate of increase as last year. The annual week-long gathering is mostly ceremonial in nature. All key decisions have already been made behind closed doors by the Communist Party. DW reporter and Asia analyst Clifford Coonan joins us here in the studio for more. So 5% GDP growth, that sounds quite optimistic, considering the current state of the Chinese economy, doesn't it?
Well, it is optimistic. I've been going through the government work report, which is quite a hefty document, and comparing it to last year's. And actually, the forecasts are pretty much the exact same as last year, which, literally the exact same. What's interesting, though, is that it's a different world since last year. Last year was coming out of the pandemic. There was expectations that the economy was going to have a bounce back from the pandemic, which didn't happen in China. So now what they're trying to do is they're having the same forecast, but the situation is a lot more complex for them. It's facing a lot more headwinds. And
we have to say, the Chinese government has been accused in the past of dressing up those numbers, but it seems not even leaders can sugarcoat the current situation. I just want to have a quick play now of what China's number 2 Premier Qiang had to say.
The foundation for China's sustained economic recovery and growth is not solid enough, as evidenced by a lack of effective demand, low public expectations, and many lingering risks and hidden dangers.
Candid. Do we ever hear that level of candor from? Does it just say something about how bad it is?
I think it does, and some analysts are saying that it could be. It's a sign that it's even worse because, if this is the window dressing, I think there's a couple of things going on here. One is that things get framed as a kind of a campaign very often. That to get the people behind it, to say that we're all in this together. This is very much the kind of the rhetoric that you get at these Communist Party events. But it is also worth noting that at the end of the speech he says that the wisdom of the Chinese people and the resolve will eventually triumph. So I think it's not quite as negative, but at the same time it is pretty a pessimistic point of view in a way.
What will it take to get China the sort of growth that it's hoping to get with these projections or these goals?
Well, I think it needs reform. The economy needs to be reformed. There's such a focus now on security, on issues like, we just saw earlier that we saw the report about the Philippines and, the clashes that we're seeing in South China Sea. There's all these sort of issues that the Chinese government is dealing with at the moment. So it needs to change. But in some ways, China couldn't keep growing the way it was growing for so long, and it was always going to slow down. And it's a question of what pace it happens and how that happens. And the way it feels at the moment is that there's maybe too much focus on security, too much focus on doctrinaire kind of Communist Party rhetoric rather than helping the private sector. So it's got a lot of these challenges that it needs to do. And I think probably the key word is reform. And the question is whether they can ever deliver that reform.
DW's Clifford Coonan, thank you.
Let's bring in George Magnus. He's an economist and associate at the China Center at Oxford University. Now, we heard an admission there by the Chinese premier that it's not going as well as the party would like. How deep is China's economic crisis really?
It's an interesting clip that you played from the speech, because it's a remarkably honest and candid assessment of the problems facing the Chinese economy at the moment. The rest of it, it's a lot of cheerleading and very flowery language. Some of it is very difficult to read, but this is at least a little bit honest. And I think the economy actually has struggled since abandoning zero COVID policies in 2022. It's not doing as bad now as it did, say, in the spring and summer of last year. But that's because the government is borrowing more money in order to try to finance more growth. But it's going to be really hard to hit that 5% target in 2024. It's much more challenging. And the only way they're really going to do it is by either borrowing more money than they're saying, or they're just going to miss their target and try to massage and manicure the numbers to make it look better.
What do you think is the most likely scenario?
I think they're going to massage and miss the target. I don't think they can hit 5%. I think there probably will be a little bit more stimulus to come through. But remember, China's economy now has a trend growth rate, in other words, an underlying growth rate of something that's perhaps not that much more than 3%. So if they want the economy to grow by 5%, they have to do either, remarkable market reforms, which they don't really want to do for political reasons, or they have to keep borrowing money. And that's something they also don't really want to do because they know that's dangerous for financial stability, which is actually a goal of national security.
Yeah. George, defense is, of course, also a huge issue and a huge investment. Is it paying off? Is China gaining an edge over its geopolitical rivals?
I'm not a military expert. I don't really know how good or how well spent the money is. I mean, lots of people will be familiar, though, with developments in the last year in which the defense minister had to be disposed of, so to speak, or lost his position, in which a number of senior military officials in the so-called rocket force, which is their nuclear wing, lost their jobs. There's a problem about corruption. We don't really know how well battle-tested, China's People's Liberation Army is, because they've not really had a lot of practice in fighting wars. Certainly, they're spending a lot of money on defense, and obviously the Navy is the one thing which the United States and other Western countries are keeping very, very close eye on because, for obvious reasons, South China Sea and Taiwan.
Yeah, talking about Taiwan, China has been ratcheting up the rhetoric surrounding the island for some time now. How likely do you think they are to actually make a move, briefly if you can, if that is possible?
Yeah, well, briefly, I mean, I think it's very unlikely. Certainly the economy is in a lot of trouble, which could have a perverse effect, of course, by making them more nationalistic. But I think it's a big risk, and I think Xi Jinping, the Communist Party, they crave stability over everything else at the moment. So it's just a little bit beyond, a little bit of a stretch, I think.
Thanks very much for your insights. That was George Magnus, Associate at the China Center at Oxford University.